everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Meet, Act, and Part. Well, it's 2026. This is our first episode rolling in to what is still the new year because it's January as we record this. But we'll get on to those topics in a minute. We'll just introduce ourselves as usual. There's two of us tonight. I'm one of them, Greg Knott, one of your hosts, and
I'm Darren Laners.
so Roger Van Gordon is on assignment and will join us in a future podcast. So Roger, I know you're going to listen to this, so hope your events went well, and we'll see you soon, just as we get back together for the next episode. Anyway, tonight, just kind of touching base between Darren and I, and then we're going to have a topic about how to improve your lodge meeting experience, and experience being, I think, the word we're going to emphasize tonight. So we'll come back to that. So, I mean, we wrapped up the year. I mean, Darren and we've been doing really still quite a bit Masonically in the area. You know, you may have heard us. We've mentioned a little bit about some lodge mergers probably going to happen in this area. So, two lodges in our area, St. Joseph and Ogden, of which a member of both. Darren's a member of one. He as he moved on, he was a member of the other one at one time. But we're going to come together. And that's kind of part of what inspired our talk tonight about experience for the lodge meetings. But St. Joe and Ogden, we're two little towns about 5 miles apart. We share a school district, and it's gotten to the point at Ogden that the expenses for the building and things like insurance and taxes and whatever have really just kind of put us in a spot where we can't sustain it. The St. Joe building, on the other hand, has some income because of renters. So those lodges probably will merge. They still have to take the vote. By all indication, it's a positive move for both groups. And I think because we share a school district, it'll be, easy because we're all friends anyway. But as part of that merger, and part of what we are going to work on is really putting a plan together, headed by one of our other brethren, Gary Lewis, is to try to create some momentum to invigorate the new lodge. Because it's going to be a new lodge, even though one is coming to the other, because both of them have been kind of stagnant, frankly, since probably before COVID. And, we need to do things in the community, within the meetings, within, other things that give people a reason they want to come, that they want to come back, and maybe equally important, that they want to join to begin with. And so one of the elements of this plan that Darren kind of threw out as our topic for tonight is the lodge meeting experience. And Darren, I'm going to pass to you just to talk a little bit when you think of experience, and then we'll unwind this as we're going to kind of walk through a meeting. And this is probably a topic that is easily could go to more than one podcast, because Roger has just a ton of experience with these kinds of things as well. So we're going to come back to experience and include him in another podcast. But Darren, what were your, when you started throwing out that idea, what was your, how did you get to that point that you thought we need to have, quote, experience, a different experience?
I think, the hot catchphrase now in Freemasonry is the idea of a Masonic experience. And I think it's twofold. I think that, and this has been hammered on, it's nothing new, going back to the Knights of the North talked about this, the traditional observance, I guess, movement has talked about similar things. It's basically an idea of making your meetings, degrees, lodge activities memorable and making them essentially giving your members their money's worth, making their dues worth something, because we're all paying dues, and we're paying in some lodges a significant amount of money, and other lodges probably an insignificant amount of money. That's a discussion for another time. But ultimately, we are paying an amount of money to be part of this organization. And I have always argued, especially at St. Joe, and I know you've been present for some of these arguments I've had, where, I felt that we have always had no problem writing checks to X, Y, and Z organization who comes knocking at the door asking for money. But anytime we talk about maybe spending money on ourselves for something, it seems, or has seemed, like there's been pushback. And not that money equals an experience, but basically the idea of having a Masonic experience is just giving your membership a reason to come to a stated meeting and to keep coming back and getting them engaged, and not only getting them engaged, but keeping them engaged, and giving them that desire, that hunger to want to be part of your lodge and want to be active in your lodge and active in the community. And so those are things that we'll kind of discuss and talk about, and ideas that we'll explore in this episode.
So, the looking at society a little broader, the term experience, I mean, we were talking about this in the pre-show, which isn't recorded, but maybe we should have. But if you think about experience, so I have long went to University of Illinois Big Ten football games ever since I was a little kid. And the majority of that time was, I would go early with my grandparents or aunt and uncle, later had season tickets myself, but basically you're going to the game. Now, you might have tailgated before the game as part of the quote experience, but the whole purpose of the day was the football game. Now, and Illinois is not the exception. Matter of fact, it's kind of they're just following the national trends of sports. People want to have an experience. So now when you go to a game, let's say it's a 2 o'clock game, they've got all kinds of things for families to do out front. They've got special tailgate areas, some of which, of course, are dependent on, your donation to get you closer to the stadium. Within the stadium itself, you might be in one of the skyboxes. So our Memorial Stadium was built in 1924. Well, about 15 years ago, they added some luxury suites, and I've had the opportunity to go to a bunch of games in those, and they're just a totally different experience. And experience equals people coming to games, because at times we haven't had great records. And so I've almost, at least I've asked myself the question, if we were winning, do we need to add all these other things to get people to come? Maybe, for me, going to the game and winning would still be enough. But I think the draw now is all of these other things as part of your game day experience. And, that's just one example. It seems like as I talk to younger people, my daughter and others, experience is a big part of why they choose to do things. And there's no reason that Freemasonry would be subject to anything different. If you look at our experience in the last, 50, 75 years, I'm not even going to say it was bad. It was just different. Guys after World War II came back, the camaraderie and the brotherhood alone was enough for most of them to come. And frankly, there was a loyalty factor that you saw out of, the World War II, the greatest generation, and after for a while, where you just had an obligation to go to meetings. You just had an obligation to go to church. You were on the school board. You might have been in the local Lions Club. All of those things, they were an experience, but that reason for the most part has shifted, and we haven't necessarily kept pace everywhere. And so I think that's kind of where we're going to hone down on is, making that transition, because at St. Joe, we've had some experience, some good experiences in different things, but we didn't sustain it. And I think part of our merger is to come up with a plan that, for a 2-3 year plan, or 2-3 years, we set out really what we want to do. And part of that is the experience in the lodge, out of the lodge. Tonight, we're going to kind of talk about the in lodge part of it. Darren, I mean, does that kind of set the stage, I think, before we drill down to the Masonic end of things? That's everything in society seems to be about an experience now.
Yeah, and I think we can use maybe the Illini football game as a analogy. So, case in point, and something that I don't remember when they've started doing it, but I know it seems to be rather recently, and maybe has been done, and I just didn't realize it was being done. But it's prior to the game, how does the team arrive to the stadium?
Yeah. I mean, coming in the buses, it's a big deal. You got a line, we form these lines as they get off the bus, and they're greeted by all the fans. And I think that's, it's almost like royalty walking into the court. And so I think it builds, well, the players, they want an experience too. Even if we keep drilling down on the football analogy, what we've done at Illinois, again, not different than other Big Ten schools, is we've, built an indoor practice facility, and then we built a football complex right next to it. And that complex is now extravagant weight rooms, and there's opportunities for the team to come together to build camaraderie, games, and all kinds of things they can do in this practice facility. And so, players, they want experience. So again, no difference. Not only do the fans want an experience, but the players do too. It's simply not enough to go jump your pads on and come out and play your game, because it's all about, in some ways, it's almost like we're building people's ego, not just the players, but the fans as well. And though I don't really see that necessarily in Freemasonry, you do want to give people, I think, as we're going to refer to that experience as the reason to want to come. You want to be a part of something. Well, game day, you want to be a part of it as a fan, especially, Illinois has been doing better. So it's exciting to see those, see them get off the bus and know that you were there. Or maybe, I've seen little kids yell, say, hey, hey, and they, the players wave back. So the 6-year-old gets an experience because the football player's waving at him. And so it's a feeling, I think, is really what an experience is.
Yeah, so I mean, just extrapolating that, what can be done prior to the meeting. So we have, to use an example that we do at another lodge that you and I are a member of, we have a meal together prior to our meetings at Homer, and it's not usually nothing extravagant. We're not doing a festive board. Although, if we really wanted to, we could. It would probably just require one of us taking the impetus to do so. I don't think there'd be any objection to doing it. And maybe that's something, we could obviously discuss doing at St. Joe. In fact, I think in my plan, I discussed maybe not doing it prior to a meeting, but doing one for, as a Burns night or one of the, St. John's feasts, something along those lines. But, just the simple act of breaking bread together as a means towards fellowship. And that's usually, it's something that can be done semi easily. It doesn't have to be too extravagant. I will say though that you do want to put a little bit of effort in, because cold cuts on a plate can get repetitive and boring, and it's a little bit low effort. So again, when we're thinking these things through, we do want to at least have a minimum standard of, for lack of a better term, excellence. We want to kind of try to raise the bar a little in what we're doing when we're thinking about a pre-meeting meal. Maybe not cold cuts, but maybe instead of cold cuts, maybe we get a boxed lunch from the Subway in town or something like that. You know what I mean?
Well,
Elevate it a little. Elevate it a little. That's all I'm saying. We make the joke. In fact, there's my best friend Sean growing up. I basically, he either lived at my house or I lived at his house, and his mom was like my mom and my mom was like his mom, so on and so forth. His mom married a guy named Joe Craig, and I met Joe a couple of times. We share a birthday. We're birthday buddies. Joe's a little bit older than his mom, but Joe actually yesterday sent me a somehow he came across a winding stairs Instagram reel where there was, I think it was a Sora AI clip where basically there were Masons and there were no green beans on the plate and the Masons were throwing a fit. And he sent it to me because I'm the only Mason he knows. And I, basically explained why it was, because he basically sent it to me because I was the only Mason he knows, and I had explained to him why it, was basically quote unquote supposed to be funny. But the idea, of no green beans on the plate and we're riding, whatever,
yeah.
but I thought it was sweet of him because, he took the time to think of me and hey, here I'm sending you this video. But this aside basically is just to say, we can put a little effort in and we can elevate our meals a little bit, and that can add to the Masonic experience. prior to a meeting. Or, where I've seen other lodges and in various jurisdictions, what they do is, prior to the meeting, prior to the gavel, they will line up in a procession with the lights, the volume of sacred law, and then the square and compass, and they will form a procession into the lodge and place those on the altar, and then do basically a circle around the altar and say a little blessing before their meeting, and that can be part of the Masonic experience. So there are little things, little ingredients. If we think about the Masonic experience as a whole in term of a recipe, what do you usually add to recipes to help elevate the flavor? So you add spices. So there are things that you can do to just add a little spice here and there to elevate, your Masonic experience. And I don't think that, outside of those gavels, I don't think that, and Grandmaster Phil, if you're listening, please, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with, doing some of these things.
Yeah. No, I don't think so either. I think, matter of fact, we get encouraged to do things, and in Illinois, like many other states, there's what we call the Masters Award of Excellence. And simply what it is, it's a way for lots of lodges to invigorate themselves by doing a variety of activities. And they really run the gamut between meals and education and ritual and involvement in the community and other things. And you're recognized at Grand Lodge if you've met, certain threshold, a certain, point levels. And to me, I think it's a great program. And so part of that in there is dining is a component of that scoring system, or dining with an educational topic or anything. You know what? I think, one of the early wins I think we'll do at St. Joe is get those meals. We've been kind of meeting informally at a restaurant across the street for the last few months. And I think that's been a good, signal because people have been coming. It's easy. And I think growing and moving up off of that, people will come if they know there's a meal. I mean, heck, like you said, we do it in our other lodge and people come. And the best part about it, I mean, we've got good food where we've had it at the other lodge, but honestly, it's the conversations that you have before the meeting. And because for me personally, that's a lot of the value I get out of the fraternity is all the people you get to meet and talk to, and I get to do it in person instead of, over social media or other ways that aren't as productive as you get to do it in person. And, we ask, how is each other? How's, somebody's health or your wife or your kids or where are they at or, ball game, it's just kind of, times we've talked a little bit of public of current event things, but not that often, honestly. I think people, they've gotten tired of that. And so really you're just trying to, see how each other's doing. But so that's part of it. But Darren, we've kind of talked about that Robert Burns format, and you did one of those a few years ago. And I think incorporating that one formal dinner a year, I think is a good thing because it's something we can look forward to. And, we could do it in the lodge or out of the lodge. Out of the lodge, it's, in a way, it helps bring publicity to the lodge at the fact that people know we're there. So it's I hope we incorporate that in what we're going to plan on doing for the next, couple of years. Why don't you explain what a Robert's Burn dinner is for maybe people that are listening that aren't familiar with that name?
So Robert Burns is often referred as the poet laureate of Freemasonry. He was a Scottish Freemason, and the Robert Burns dinner is often celebrated on his birthday, which is, without looking it up, I know it's the end of January. I want to say it was actually probably just this past weekend. It would have been when it was celebrated. And Greg can probably be looking it up on the search engine. It looks like he's doing that now because, believe it or not, Greg can also be my intern.
Yeah.
He just doesn't know it when he's doing it and won't admit to it. So it usually is a festive board where there are toasts, obviously the formalized toasts, and often some of Robert Burns' work will be read as part of the festive board as well, and it's just kind of a celebration of his life's work. And I think because we are blessed at our lodge, we have a member, Todd Hitt, who plays the bagpipes very well. So I think it's just kind of a no-brainer to, celebrate Robert Burns in such a fashion and employ Todd's talent, God-given talent, and playing the bagpipes as well. It also would give us a reason to all buy kilts and dress up in kilts one night, I guess, a year. So, why not?
Exactly. Why not? So Robert Burns, he was born in 1759, died in 1796. Just to give people a little bit of a time frame of when he lived, and he was a very prolific poet, and a lot of his stuff, and he was a Freemason as well. So a lot of that, here we are, a couple hundred plus years later, and he's still well known and has an influence on many things that we're doing today. Yeah, I love the whole idea of doing the Scottish version of it. So many of us have partial Scottish ancestry in our lineages or ancestry, and I don't pretend to know a lot about Scotland, but it's an opportunity to not only talk about Burns, have that dinner, but to do some education around the entire topic of he and maybe Scottish immigration to the U.S. or whatever. It's just it's an interesting topic. So yeah, so Burns dinner definitely on the table. I saw on Facebook the other night some of our brethren somewhere out east, they had a Burns dinner and were all dressed in tuxedos, and it was very formal, and they had a big gathering. They had their spouses at it, which I think is a very vital piece of experience, is to include your spouse, significant other, and family more broadly in some of what we do. Maybe they don't come to the meetings because, obviously they can't. But there's so many things you can do as part of that total Masonic experience to have them come. So even at St. Joe, even when we're going across the restaurant to across the street, a lot of times some of the spouses, if they're local, they'll come drive separate and they'll come because they like talking to each other. So you're building this camaraderie and family with one another. That's just, again, to me, adding value to the total Masonic experience. So that's sort of dining. We have talked about music. Darren, what do you talk a little bit about music or where that is? Or I know we've talked about how you come in the lodge. So we're
Yeah.
now at the beginning of the meeting. What would you suggest we think about as we put our plan together?
So music has always, obviously, it's one of the several liberal arts and sciences which we are taught in the fellowcraft degree that we should be studying. There is a office in the lodge, that of organists, and many lodges, especially in the Grand Lodge of England, and until through the Gilded Age, many lodges had organs in their lodge rooms. And in fact, in the Grand Lodge building in Indiana, they've got a lodge room with a pipe organ. That one of their lodge rooms has a pipe organ, and so there's a office appointed officer of the organist that would be responsible for playing music during degrees and during stated meetings. And I think that music has always been a part of Freemasonry, and at some point, for whatever reason, lodges had gotten away from using music. But if you look at the number of musicians who are also Freemasons, and even to this day, there are musicians that are Freemasons. So, there has always been a relationship between music and Freemasonry. Obviously, Mozart is one of our probably most famous Masons. The magic flute is very much a Masonic allegory. Some people would call it a Rosicrucian allegory as well. I wouldn't argue that, but you see the influence of Freemasonry in his work. And so I think that music can be used as part of the Masonic experience. You could use music whilst during the opening, while the junior deacon is purging the lodge. You could use it, in several parts where there is not ritual. I think that could be, you can use various, you could look at various pieces of music, and you could really orchestrate or arrange pieces of music to fit various parts of the opening where there's not ritual, to add to a Masonic experience in a lodge. So I think that music could be used very, very easily to add to the Masonic experience. And it's something that we did for a time do it at St. Joe, and I thought that it was well received, and I don't really remember why we went away from it, honestly.
Yeah, I
I
think
think
we
we
just
just stopped doing it, and we never started it back up, and
right.
nobody really demanded that we start it back up, and that's really a shame because maybe we
Yeah.
should have been like, hey, why aren't you playing the music? I really like that.
And two things here. I mean, today, literally, I was just as I was looking on my phone here at the Magic Flute. I mean, we have every piece of music known to humankind practically available via phone that is you can Bluetooth to a speaker, as simple as that, a portable speaker, bringing it in, and you can have music with almost no effort. No effort. You know, just to harken back to the older days a little bit, we had a piano at St. Joe at one time, and it was such condition that we were never going to use it. Gave it away, and it got moved. But it was funny as we were digging through that. Order of the Eastern Star has always had a big musical part of their meetings and programs, and so, and of course, lots of lodges. You know, years ago also had an Eastern Star that was meeting in the same. So it was not unusual at all for many of the brethren to be familiar with the concept of using music all the time. Think about, a religious service. They have music within that service because it helps set the tone for what they're trying to accomplish there. Or a college graduation. We've got the certain march where the graduates are coming in, and that music helps set the tone because really we're really talking about a ceremony here as much as we are a meeting. You're setting the tone for the night. And part of what we experience, again, that word in Freemasonry, is in a way a change of mindset. So as the meeting begins and we open 1, 2, and 3, you're really creating a mindset of harmony and unanimity and all the things that go along with the ritual. Now, with the music piece, one of the ideas I think, Darren, we kicked around was maybe all the officers come and march in together, walk in together. But, when the master is getting ready to tell the officers to take their stations, we actually just do it a tad more formal. We are out in the foyer. We could walk in together, and you add a little bit of ritual to people even taking their stations, and maybe the music plays as we come in, or some idea like that. Again, very easy to do. It's low-hanging fruit if that's one of the ideas that a lodge might want to adapt. But what it does is help, I think, set the tone for the seriousness that we take our Masonic work.
Yeah, I fully agree. I was actually kind of digging around because I know and I forget, I think it was at St. Joe, I had found a book of Masonic. It was like Masonic hymnals, and so basically a book of musical songs and such that would have been sung or played at the various during the various degrees or meetings, or Masonic, for the officers installation, so on and so forth. And again, to your point, I like the idea of the procession into the lodge, and that could be something that could do a twofer. So not only are the deus officers coming into the lodge, but also, you could have the master carrying the Bible, and then maybe both the warden, the senior warden, the junior warden carrying the square and compass, and putting them on the altar reverently, and so on and so forth. So these again are ideas that could be that you could do set to music, and you kind of use these things as building blocks to add to the Masonic experience. Another thing that relatively easy to do now is they have the kind of the electronic candles, if you will, where the little plastic candles where the wick looks like it's plastic, but it kind of flickers back and forth, and they look like real candles, except they're not. And so, especially in the older buildings where a risk of fire is a concern of brethren, and they wouldn't want open flame, you could, use these as a replacement for the lesser lights, and instead of we have currently the light bulbs with the square and compass and the G, which are fine, but we could do more meetings by candlelight, or and use those types of candles just to add to, the experience, degrees by candlelight, that sort of thing. I think that adds again to your, what you're talking about, where you're adding to maybe the contemplative element of and the mindset that you want the membership to have in as part of the stated meeting. And now, the audience will be like, well, it's just a stated meeting, you're just going to be arguing over X, Y, and Z. And I think that kind of, maybe we need to talk about, well, how can you make your meeting more of an experience and less of a business meeting? So I think, and we have done this with some limited success at St. Joe, when we stick to an agenda and the master sticks to the agenda that is put out, in my mind. And of course, this is because I'm secretary and I want everything to be done procedurally. But I also think that when you work off an agenda, basically all the members of the lodge should have that agenda in front of them. They should have read through the agenda. And basically the only thing that should come to the floor are items on the agenda that need to have a vote, or any items that any member that aren't on the agenda that any member wants to bring to the floor. And I would, though, and I think that a good master/secretary should ask their membership prior to the meeting if there are any items not on the agenda that you would like to be added to the agenda, to please send them in so that we could get them added. And if they require a vote, revise the agenda, send that out to the membership so that a revised agenda could be sent out, meaning that you try to eliminate the amount of items that are ad hoc items that are being brought for business from the floor. You try to stick the agenda, and you basically have a streamlined meeting, meaning, you open, and if you do open 1, 2, 3, that usually will take anyway 15 to 20 minutes. Roughly. So say you start meeting at 7:20, the meeting is open. You have the minutes already sent out, treasurer's report, bills, all that sent out. So you can basically immediately vote on those because they've been on the membership, should have read those via email. I'm assuming all the members have email. If not, then a good secretary will have printouts for those members that don't. And there will always be a few that don't have email. It's just the nature of having a membership that slides, unfortunately, to an older age. All that being said, your old business should be essentially anything on the agenda. If there's a vote required, again, that's listed on the agenda. It can be brought to the floor for the vote. Any discussion that is needed can be discussed at that time. Again, new business should be able to be on the agenda. Brothers are able to communicate via email outside of the meeting. There's nothing that says that we can't discuss things. We just can't vote on them outside of the meeting. So all of this is to say that you should be able to handle a lot of your business prior to the meeting. The only thing that should be being handled in the meeting is discussion and or any votes that are required, any balloting that is required. And then that should then allow you enough time to have Masonic education and discussion, which I think personally should be the focus of and the highlight of every stated meeting, and that should be the focus of Masonic experience. And because we are an organization that promotes self-improvement, our tagline is taking good men and making them better. Well, how do we do that? How does one magically improve themselves?
Yeah.
Well, unless you're putting in the work, one of the ways that you are able to improve yourself is through educating yourself. And so I think, therefore, Masonic education is the most vital part of a stated meeting.
Yeah, I agree. It's, of course, Darren, my last job in my career I was a secretary for a big organization, and we had a board of trustees, and it was my job to manage their work. And I had to do all the things that you just outlined in terms of preparation for a meeting. We had agendas, and nothing was going to happen at a meeting unless it had been vetted through, a series of people, and ultimately it wouldn't make the agenda unless it was, kind of prepared in advance. And I think that's what your message is that do some homework in advance, because we already knew the outcome of a meeting before we ever got there. That was the point. Much of the work, either the research or, preparation, had either been presented already or was, we did things by committee. And as the chair always emphasized, all the work is done in the committee. And by the time you got to the full board meeting, that was just, the process to approve the final product and see if there were any final questions. But by the time it got that far, it should be, not automatic that it's going to be approved, but pretty much. And I think the same thing on a smaller scale in a Masonic lodge. I think this is one of the things, again, we're going to work through in our plan for the next, coming couple of years is, if we meet on the first Thursday, well, a week ahead of that, if there's anything you want on the agenda, or if you know something coming up, it should be, brought up, given to the master and the secretary, and they put together the agenda, which, it's very simple. We've got templates to do all this, and then that's sent out. And so people know what to expect when they come to the meeting. And I think, again, to reemphasize the experience part of that, if they know that their experience is going to be worthwhile, they know there's business that we have to approve. And, there's some finite details. We can get into that another podcast. But what it does, it allows the time for your point, Darren, about Masonic education. I think so many meetings, and I've been to a ton of them and been guilty of a lot of it too. You go to the meeting, and because you show up, you need to talk about something to make it worth the time, because you don't want to waste people's time. So you just kind of come up with stuff. Well, most of it's usually trivial or things that could have been on a consent agenda. We can explain what a consent agenda is another time. But it's, what's the purpose? Well, okay, a lodge, I think if they put their plan together like we're working on, you start to define it so that, well, it's like, okay, well, the business part's only, another 15 minutes. And then these other things, Masonic education, having outside speakers come in, maybe the meeting's short because you're going to go have a formal dinner before or after, all those things, all of a sudden they become second nature. And I think if you didn't say it, we were sure hinting around about it, was effort. We got to put some effort in before we get there. Meeting night. I think one of the challenges with one of the lodges that's merging in, we ran out of gas. We've had trouble making quorums, and there's really the only topic of business is, are we going to have enough money to pay the insurance and the taxes? And that's not enough reason for people to want to come, because we ran out of steam on it. So you have to give people a reason to come, because again, to the whole topic, it's part of the experience. So a well-informed member, I think, Darren, is what you're really, if we had to summarize it, is going to come to a meeting prepared, maybe at least they saw the agenda and they know what to anticipate. And as part of that agenda, guess what? The people that build the agenda, well, they're the ones driving the ship. So they can leave enough time on that agenda for a 20-minute, Masonic education. And everybody's like, oh, okay. In our trustee minutes, or meetings, I would get things almost down to the minute, because we would allot time. We had a lot to do in those meetings. Point being, it was really no different. We anticipated how much time it was going to take, and so we were prepared. And if we weren't prepared, yeah, that was always my fear, is we weren't going to be prepared. So you would think I should be able to help carry that over to the Masonic meetings too. It's no different. It's part of getting value and giving people, why should I go? I joined the ceremony's neat, but what do you do? Well, okay, that's all part of that question, right? So experience, that's part of it too. So we've just let's just see where we're at already. So we've talked about dinners and the kind of things you can do with that before a meeting, and they can take a variety of shapes, from anywhere from informal to formal. And with spouses, without spouses. And of course, the joy of that is getting to spend time with other people. Talked about the pre-meeting being the officers all assembling in the outer room or in the foyer or whatever you call it in your lodge. And they come in together and they're accompanied by music. We didn't talk about incense. That's sometimes that's another option. And I'm no expert on that at all. We talked about doing things by candlelight because lighting is very important. If it's all fluorescent lighting in a room, that sets a different tone than softer lights that maybe are by the, electronic candles, we'll call it, or whatever. So all of it's about a mood. You're setting the mood, and that mood, I think, we've talked about the agenda preparation and being ready. That it just all flows. I think then because it creates a sense of seriousness that I think we've been guilty of letting ourselves slide on some of these at times, and I think that's what they're looking for, an experience that's serious. And again, we're just talking about the lodge meeting. We're not even talking about all the stuff you can do outside the lodge. But it's building that reason why people can come, that mystique, those mysteries that we sort of allude to in the degrees. Well, part of that's because you have to set the tone and the mood to experience those. Because again, take a degree. You can go find any ritual you want online, and you can read it, and you'll know what it says. There's really no secrets to it. But you've not experienced it, and I think that's what we're trying to hone in on here. Is the degree work is an experience in itself, but we're trying to say, okay, after your degree work is over, how can we keep adding to that experience? So, Darren, so there we've set that part of the stage. What else would you see potentially for meeting night experience? What else would you think about?
Well, you discussed incense, which is, I think, something that, yeah, I think that definitely adds to it. So, we were kind of hinting around at, we're talking about things that are sensual, what things that your input of your senses. So obviously the lighting, the sounds. So we talked about music, we talked about the candlelight, we talked about the incense, the smells. Dinner would be taste. The tactile, I guess, could be something. And I guess I'll use an example. I'm in kind of a little chat group with some other dignitaries of Masonic education. I'll say, I won't give away any names, but that we were discussing today, the Grand Lodge of Texas came out with their Grandmaster put out basically a dress code for their Masonic meetings, for Grand Lodge meetings, so on and so forth, and what type of dress that was required for each particular activity, if you will. And I think that a standard of dress should be something that maybe we discuss as part of one's Masonic experience. And I know, we've probably talked about this topic before. I'm sure we have. And there's always been the argument, well, it's the internal qualifications of a man. But if we're talking about setting the mood, I think he not only, setting a very much a contemplative and serious atmosphere for our lodge, I think that we should discuss maybe a minimum of standard of dress. And I'm not, the expectation is that it's tuxedo every meeting. That's obviously ridiculous. That's not going to fly with the membership. But I do think that asking the membership to maybe dress business casual for every meeting is not outside the realm of a unreasonable ask, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think with the dress code, the neat thing about what we're talking about is you can vary it over the course of the year based on what you're doing. If it's a totally serious, like more formal meeting, say, hey, let's throw the suits on tonight. Maybe, Christmas time, we've had Santa Claus and the elf come, and,
Right.
We have ugly sweat. So I think you can use the dress part of it also as a fun thing.
Sure.
Hey, we know it's summer, it's going to be hot as heck. Throw the Hawaiian shirt on, whatever.
Right.
I think what we're alluding to here is more buy-in about, again, the experience of your
Right.
membership in a lodge.
Yeah.
And you're right. If you just all show up willy-nilly in different ways, that's not a negative, but if we're talking about an experience, you can add to that experience by, say, hey, tonight we're dressing up, we're business casual this meeting, whatever. And I think
Yeah.
communicating that to people so that they know, and again, maybe as we set out a year's worth of, here's what's going to go on this year, we just kind of lay those things out. Because again, people really want to meet the expectation. If the expectations group wise aren't ever communicated, again, they don't know. I would always have new student trustees as part of the board. And part of because I was the one really communicated with them, was letting them know what to wear. They didn't know. They hadn't been, their lives had not given them the opportunity to serve on a university, board. And so part of it, I was helping them create the expectation. Guess what? They all met it because they wanted to be serious about what they were doing. And
Right.
I think same with Freemasonry, let people know, and we've seen lodges, they'll adapt to their local style based on what they want to do. That's why I like the freedom to choose. So yeah, I think part of that definitely as we put our work together over the next few months for this our new effort, that'll be a vital part of it. I like how you were talking too about hitting the sensories, the touch, the feel, the smell, the sight, all of that adds, to, because we all experience it all day long, right? Based on what you're doing, it's just part of the human experience. I think being able to elevate that a little bit within the lodge, and again, maybe it's not every time because, there's some things I think you want to do every time. There's some things you want to save for special occasions, So again, depends on the mix of what the lodge is trying to accomplish for their particular goals. We have internet at St. Joe, and
Yes.
not every lodge does. We've used it at times, but again, we've got the tools there to bring in outside speakers, and maybe
Mhm.
we just zoom them in. They don't even have to
Right.
be,
Exactly.
because it's a lot of the good speakers you may want for Masonic education. To be honest, it's not practical to get them on a Thursday night to St. Joseph, Illinois, but there's no reason we can't zoom them in and let them be a part of our meeting in regards to the education they're going to deliver. And again, education can be anything from, maybe it's the Grand Lost Charity Program,
Right.
or maybe it's your local school administrator,
Mhm.
or what's happening in your community. Not politics. I'm talking about public affairs. Or Darren and I, we visited our local library not too long ago and heard just an amazing discussion and talk from a Holocaust survivor. And I mean, we learned so much hearing it from someone that was there firsthand. And there's a lot of people that would love to share their story, their passion. And a Masonic Lodge meeting is built-in readiness for that to happen. So anyway, kind of went on a tangent there, but it's the opportunities are gold if we seek to achieve them. Darren, what else in a meeting? Oh, I suppose we've kind of talked about the before, the during, the business part of it,
Yeah.
the education. Anything on closing a meeting that strikes you?
Well, I think, again, there are certain jurisdictions that will do, some jurisdictions this is ritual, others it is not. But again, a lot of jurisdictions or lodges will do what's called the chain of union, where as part of the closing or after the meeting, the brethren will gather kind of around the altar and just kind of form a circle around the altar and just, kind of sometimes there's ritual, sometimes there's not. Just having gratitude for being able to have the fellowship of their brethren there, and giving thanks for having a good experience. And I think that's a really positive way to close out that experience, especially if you have implemented everything else, when you're, to kind of put the bookends on it, if you will, especially if you implemented kind of the procession into the lodge. I think, the bookend of that would be at the end of the meeting, maybe after obviously in Illinois, after the gavel. Just ask the brethren, to take a second to all gather around the altar and just almost like, again, to use the sports analogy, almost like a team after a game huddles in the locker room and says, good game. We all kind of huddle around the altar and say, great meeting, guys. Can't wait to see you again next meeting, or see you in another week when we do X, Y, and Z in the community, whatever the next event is where we'll see each other. Just, just have that moment together where we are thankful for each other's presence in each other's lives. And I think that can be a really powerful moment and really kind of build relationships and fellowship. And I think those are opportunities that we need to take advantage of to help build relationships and build, especially when we're consolidating lodges, because some of these brethren, I know some of them, but some of them will be foreign to me. Some of them will be newer members that I've not had much interaction with. So for me personally, it's an opportunity to get to know these brothers and to get to work with them. So I think, that adds opportunity to not only to have the fellowship, but also kind of set a standard and to set an expectation that, this is how we're going to do things here, and to set a standard and to set almost to make it a habit, to make sure that when we start doing these things, that we do it the same way every meeting. And so then it becomes habit. And so that brethren are used to, this is just how we're doing things, guys. And I think once people are used to it, they're going to expect it and they're going to want it. And so that holds us all accountable to make sure that we continue doing it. Because I think, at least, I can only speak to the experience at St. Joe. What normally has happened at St. Joe is that I don't think that we've done a great job as when the younger officers have come up in the line behind, that there's been a good mentoring from maybe the guys who've been master haven't really been mentoring the guys behind them. So we had a line of masters that really didn't quite know what they were supposed to be doing. And so they just were kind of going through the motions. They knew how to run a meeting, but they didn't really think that there was more to being master than what they were doing, if that makes sense. So
yeah. So I think that's, and Darren has been a guest on the Masonic Roundtable recently, talking about what to expect when you're expecting as the incoming master. And he's given a lot of thoughts on his experience about, he served a couple different times. And so, yeah, that's a great topic. Mentoring is a great topic. We're going to come back to all of these, because if you can't tell, listeners, and thank you for listening, as we reinvigorate our lodge, we're going to kind of bring you along on the journey, because we're going to use some of our airtime to talk about the things. One, because it helps us flesh out ideas, but maybe we're sharing something with you as well that you could use in your lodge. So kind of to bookend our discussion here, again, our focus has been Masonic experience, in this case about the meeting itself. And there's, of course, a number of other ideas that you could do that would play well in your particular lodge. But we hope you've gotten a little bit out of what we've discussed here tonight. I'm getting excited again about thinking about what we could do at the new combined lodges. And we're going to achieve success, because I think there's a group of brethren that are determined to make it happen. We just have to really, what Darren's hit on more than once, is the follow through and the follow up to ensure that we do these things, because they quickly can become habits, good or bad, depending on what you're doing. And so we want to, give people a reason to come. So, Darren, let me throw it back to you just one last time. Any closing thoughts as we wrap up this episode?
I know. I think it's been a good episode. I think, next episode, assuming we don't have a guest, I think we can get Roger's input to maybe expand on this topic and get his thoughts on the episode and what he may have wanted to add, because I think, an hour is, we scratched the surface here, but I think it's a good start, and I'm looking forward to, if our listeners have any ideas or comments, feedback, obviously know that you can reach us on social media, and we're more than happy to respond to anything, or if you are vehemently against anything we said, hey, I'd love to have you come on and give us your opinion. We're always looking, always looking for good counterpoints as well. So thanks to our listeners for listening to us and putting up with us for now 71 episodes. We've been doing this now for 6 years, Greg. I don't believe it.
6 years. Yeah, I never thought we'd make it that long. It's been a great time putting
Sometimes
this
we've been
together.
limping along, but we're doing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So we're getting our vigor back, after
Yeah, I think
we're getting it going.
I'm
So anyway, if you want to interact with us, you can. We're on Facebook, other places. We've got the meetactandpart.com. There, I want to also put a plug in for the blog. Darren and some other folks have written some great articles that are on that blog. Go in depth. Some of them hit a little bit about what we're talking about tonight. Others are just other topics. If you are interested in perhaps submitting an article, Darren is our editor for the blog. He will entertain, guest articles because we're trying to find that wide variety of viewpoints and perspectives that add, value to the readers and listeners of Meet, Act, and Part. We want to thank you for spending some time with us. Again, 2026, we're going to have another great year. We appreciate you, and spread the word. If you have brethren that don't know about us, of our podcast and our blog, please share it with them. Have them take a listen. Maybe you've got a great topic that you want to be a podcast guest sometime. We haven't thrown that out too much, but if you've got something that's innovative and new, maybe we'll take a look at it and consider it. So anyway, we hope you have a great day. And again, we appreciate you listening.